I was forced to quit at that point because my
Mm-hmm.
what the options were come back to the office, um, a place that I wasn't feeling safe, that this person was like poking at me. They hadn't addressed that issue, right? And they just
Mm-hmm.
like flat out said, no, we don't acknowledge your mental health condition, your ADHD diagnosis.
Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. My name is Whitney Knox-Lee, and I'm your host. This is Season 3 of Impostrix Podcast, where we are focusing on validating small business owners of color, entrepreneurs, and folks who unfortunately are navigating employment discrimination in their workplace. Impostrix Podcast always puts folks of color first. So all of our guests are people of color who are sharing about their personal experience or their learned experience. So buckle up, let's go. Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Knox-Lee, and I am here today with Noris. This conversation is going to continue conversations that we've had throughout this little mini series relating to harassment in the workplace and how we navigate those situations where we find ourselves, kind of living with this ongoing threat or ongoing feeling of toxicity, and trying to figure out what to do and how to navigate it. So I'm going to have Norris introduce himself, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So, Norris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And yes, and can you share with us what are the identities that you're bringing into this conversation?
My name is Noris Chavarría. I am queer, gay, Latino, second gen. My mom is from El Salvador. I also say I'm a zaddy, which is someone who is confident, stylish, someone who kind of owns their power in the world and walks around, leads that way. And New Yorker, East Coast. And I identify with New Yorker, East Coast, now living in California, because there are lots of differences. And I always go back to it's a California thing. So, yeah.
Do you find California to be like more chill? Because I know you're in the Bay Area. Do you find it to be more chill than New York?
Definitely more chill, definitely slower. I'm actually in West Hollywood. I, I was previously in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I recently moved here in the last couple of years. But yeah, everything is slower. Everything is takes longer. Um, Definitely a chill vibe.
Yeah. Mm, okay. Well, thank you for joining us. And what are you doing now in your professional capacity?
So I actually have my own business. It's called Noris Knows, and it's a consulting and coaching business. It's a two-part component. I do executive leadership coaching with LGBT and people of color, primarily gay men. And I also do fundraising consulting, which is kind of a combo thing where people come in for the fundraising piece because it's a very useful thing to learn. But I also empower my clients to actually do the fundraising themselves, so that I'm not just popping in and popping out, and they
Mhm,
develop those skills that they need to have to continue doing the work. Because I'm a
mhm.
consultant, I'm not at the actual organization.
Okay, Norris. So you and I, of course, have talked previously as we are preparing for this conversation. And I know that you have experienced harassment within the workplace. And so I think I want to start this conversation just by asking you, what was the significant moment? What was the moment that it dawned on you that you were experiencing harassment? And I wanted to start with this question instead of having you explain everything, because I think this is how it happens for
Mm.
many of us, is that like we're just going along and yeah, work sucks, but it's work, so work is going to suck. Is what we think. And then something happens and we realize that everything that has sucked thus far is not just it's not normal, it's not regular, it's not we should not be experiencing it, but instead it is actually a symptom of this systemic or even maybe acute um, harassment or discrimination or other type of transgression against us. And so for you, what was it? What was that moment?
Uh, so I think that there was a combination of things. I think it was a culmination of all the events, and during the pandemic, this happened to me during the pandemic, where I had asked for work from home accommodation that was sponsored or written by my provider at the time, to work from home. I was diagnosed with ADHD during the pandemic in 2020. I accessed remote services, mental health services, and I'm a type A person, so I wanted to put in all the paperwork in since the HR. And the second time, so I did it for 2 years. First year I was approved. Second year I was denied it, and I just I was like, what? Make it make sense for a second. I didn't know what to do, right? And the other piece of it was the my supervisor didn't actually. I felt like she didn't read the letter or anything that I had submitted, because in the meeting that I had with her, all she did was give me work directives to be in the office. And I say that it was a culmination because I actually didn't want to go into the office. And because my work as a fundraiser, my capacity was a fundraiser, I didn't necessarily need to be in the office, right? Everyone's being remote. Digital fundraising is a thing. People can work from home. And I was performing well. And I didn't want to go into the office because every time I actually stepped into the office, to like the workplace, even just like the reception area, I felt like I walk in and I would have people comment on things that I wear. Ooh, that's a nice sweater. Ooh, that's a nice bike. That must be expensive, right? Or they started, and it was just this. I don't know about anyone else, but that's not the way that I want to be received at work when I walk in. I'm a very good morning, very courteous person, very welcoming. And, when someone is kind of like jabbing at you, that's what I felt it was, on my appearance, on anything that I had on me. I felt targeted that way. And I didn't want to experience that at work, you know. I shared an office with three other people, or there were three other, desks there. And this individual also would, so it wasn't only at the front desk that this would happen, but this would also happen when I'm minding my own business, doing my work. And, this individual would come in and just make some comments. And he also like took it a little further because I would say something like, "Oh, well, you can also buy this sweater, or you can also buy this bike or whatever it is, on whatever day it was that they were like poking at me." And they would say, "Oh no, but I have kids, or I have
Oh,
other
yeah.
expenses,
Right.
and that's not my problem."
Yeah.
Those are choices, right? But I felt that it was targeted at me for being gay, at this
Mm,
organization. And it didn't it was that moment, post pandemic, when I was denied that everything kind of came, you know, everything
mm,
was like, why am I having these issues? Because I also live 2 blocks away from the organization.
mhm.
And even just being my grocery store was literally next to the organization. And I just felt like scared or weird, even going to my local grocery store. It was just like this feeling of, I'm going to be harassed. I'm going to, someone's going to say something about me, or I don't belong, and that's why they're poking fun at me.
Mm,
So yeah, that was like the moment where I was just like, now I have, now when, the executive director is telling me you have to be in the office, even though I had raised this issue with them and HR before, this behavior, this person just like coming in and, making comments and stuff. And I had asked them to, let's have a meeting, address it. I don't know what people do in those situations.
yeah, yeah.
And on top of it, I was asking for my safety, right? I was working from home, and
Yeah.
that's what I was requesting on top of it. So when that happened, I was just like, okay, this means I'm out of a job. Um, Even though that didn't happen in that moment, but just me having to go through that, to go into the office, deal with, this person on a daily basis, and my supervisor not even acknowledging the fact that my needs, my mental health needs with my diagnosis, just that was it.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding, it was this combination of you had been dealing with this person who was making these comments towards you that to you felt um, inappropriate, but also felt like they were trying to get under your skin, maybe, or trying to um, I don't know, poke at you regarding how you present yourself. And it was actually, uncomfortable for you, and it did impact your mental health. And then on top of that, you also had a new diagnosis of ADHD that you were navigating, and so you had requested this accommodation that they had given you initially, but then when you requested it for a second year in a row, they said no, and it's at that point that you were realizing, like, the what the atmosphere, what the environment was for you, and how that environment, um, was harming you. Is that right?
Hmm. Yeah, and it almost reminded me of being bullied,
Mm,
and even though these comments were supposedly good comments and complimentary comments, right? Of nice sweater, nice this, nice, whatever. Um, it did seem like it was bullying, you know.
mhm. Like, it was kind of like a, not two-faced, that's not the right word, but, like, they're saying something, but they mean the opposite type of thing?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, how did you well, I guess you talked about that you had previously reported the behavior, and then separately that you had been talking with your supervisor regarding the accommodation, and that you felt that the supervisor was not really even taking your concerns seriously. So, what did you do now? How did you handle that? Because it sounds like you did the things that you thought you were supposed to do.
Yeah, I think one of the superpowers of having ADHD is hyper focusing. And so I knew that the situation was wrong, I knew that, like, how did this just happen? Isn't Do people get denied, or a accommodation like that that's sponsored by your provider? And I was seeing this provider frequently.
Mhm.
And luckily I also have friends in my network that work in labor, and those kind of things. And I just asked them, like, it was my first time, right, doing all
Yeah.
this. I was like, is this right? Like, this just seems off. And from one year to another, being the first year, not being denied, and then the second year being denied, like, how does that happen? I mean, the condition is still there, right?
Right. And was it still during COVID?
Yeah.
So everybody's working from home anyways,
Hmm.
in terms of, like I mean, well, not everybody, but it's still very common to work at home.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
even that, I had in our meeting, our last meeting in July, when this happened, the my supervisor even added, "Oh, we'll have extra cleaning staff to clean the areas, clean your desk, do all the sanitary things," which then confirmed that she didn't really read my letter. I'm like, this has nothing to do with, like, sanitation or anything. It has to do with, I can't work in a loud place. Stimulus distracts me. I'm much better at writing, which fundraising is a lot of writing, and focusing. But there are a lot of distractions, including this person who's coming in. And so one of the first things that my friend had recommended is to file some kind of something with like some government office, which I did. It's a lot of research, it's a lot of Googling, a lot of all those things. And I initially filed with the federal, I forget what the agency is, but it's like Employment Opportunity Agency,
Hmm.
federal
The
one.
EEOC.
And did the interview with them, and then they recommended that I do it with California, the California Civil Rights Organization, which is similar, but I guess because the federal one at the time they had Trump leftover people, they thought the California would be more rigorous in terms of their search and investigation
Hmm.
and what they do.
Yeah, the
So I,
California government's more liberal than the federal government at that point.
mhm. So I went through the motions of all that. Well, actually, let me take it. So I did that as like a thing, right?
Hmm.
Filed it because I knew there was something wrong, and I feel like I needed to put like a timestamp on it. Uh, I went on leave because my doctor, I called my doctor and I was just like, this is really, it's new. I don't know if I can like work under that. And obviously, we had already a relationship. And so he recommended 3 months off, which I did. Take the 3 months off. During that time, work kept asking me to do work. And then I also, I was like, sounds like you're asking me to do work, and that's not what I'm doing right now. I'm on leave. Um,
Yeah.
and I think they got all, bothered because someone was not just doing what they wanted them to do. Um, Come November, so this was during the summer, so in July 2021. Come November, I was due to come back into the office or, back to work thing. But before that, I asked about health insurance because that's like the time, again, I'm a type A, right? So I'm like, okay, this is like
Hmm.
health insurance and I'm seeing a doctor and I can't pay out of pocket, right?
Hmm.
So how's this going
Because
to
it
work
was
out?
what, like the open enrollment period, right?
Yeah, open enrollment. And so I reach out and I say, hey, I know it's open enrollment. What do you need from me to make sure that I can still do my thing, right? They didn't respond right away. It took a while. And I think they responded like late November or something. And they're like, oh, well, actually, we can just, and then at that point, there was like back and forth kind of thing. They're like, when are you coming back in? When are you coming back in? When are you coming back in? Before even me getting my answer, my question answered. It's like, so when's open enrollment? Because I'm still seeing my doctor, right? And in the back and forth, at some point, they didn't tell me about open enrollment. And what they said is, we can deduct the premiums, the cost of insurance from. It won't cost you. This is how they say it won't cost you, but because we can just deduct it from your accrued time PTO. And I was like, what? That is a cost. That's my money, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's my money. That's my vacation time. That's my time off. That is money. Um, and then I raised it to the board. I emailed the
Mhm.
board at that point because I'm like, are you listening to what your people are saying? Because you're supposed to be, responsible for whatever, I guess they're supposed to be responsible for. But and the board president, which I had, being a fundraiser, I had a bit more of a
Mm.
relationship with them.
Yeah.
Um, he just, I see to see everybody at this point, because I was like, what am I going to lose, right? Including all staff, which I had access to at that point.
Oh, Lord. You didn't tell me that. Oh, God. Do not. No. Okay. Never mind. I'm going to let you keep going.
When the board, said, so email the board first because I was like, okay, let me try one more time, right? Are you listening to what HR is doing? And you being the board could probably do something else, right?
Right.
They delegated to HR. They're like, oh, whatever HR, I'm sure that you and HR can figure it out on like a staff level or employee level kind of thing. And I was like, you mean to tell me that you're approving what they said, that they wouldn't pay for my insurance and that me coming back was questionable, like for my position. How about that?
Mm.
Yeah, so then at that point, then that's when I emailed all staff of like, can you believe this is what happened to me? You know?
Wow.
And this could also happen to you, kind of thing.
Yeah, as a
But also
warning.
just, yeah, and also just, I felt like there were, me being at a director level, and I would see a lot of the staff kind of thing, but we weren't necessarily like congregate except for like all staff meetings. And
Mm-hmm.
so I also wanted to give them my perspective that all these things were happening, and no one knew, right? Because it was only HR, myself, and supervisor and
Mm-hmm.
board. But you all should know also that this is happening. I believe it's because of XYZ. And that was in December.
Mm.
Uh, I was forced to quit at that point because
Mm-hmm.
what the options were: come back to the office, um, a place that I wasn't feeling safe, that this person was like poking at me. They hadn't addressed that issue, right?
Mm.
And they just
Mm-hmm.
like flat out said, no, we don't acknowledge your mental health condition, your ADHD diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of questions that I have for you. I'm trying to decide the order of them. Um, I think I want to back up a little bit because you mentioned your doctor, and I think that it's like just something for listeners who are experiencing a disability, to know more about what that's like
Mm.
working with a medical professional, to help you acclimate now, especially that, this is a new diagnosis for you, um, to help you acclimate to this part of you that you now know about, and acknowledging that you're an adult, you're a working person who needs to have income and this job. And so I wonder if you can talk to us about like what was that like, finding a supportive doctor who um you could trust, and working with them on uh navigating this ADHD and work.
Yeah, that's a great question because when I was at night, I was like, how am I going to sustain
Mm,
myself, right? I mean, that's my first thought
yeah.
that came to mind. I looked out that it was my my doctor, my psychiatrist, also had ADHD,
Mm, mhm.
or he was also living with ADHD, and also had a late diagnosis. And one thing that when I looked him up on a website portal, one thing that was helpful was that his approach to things was almost like a life coach type approach. And I remember this exercise that he did with me, which is super, super helpful. He's asking, we went through my resume pretty much, and he saw that I bounced a lot of, I didn't have like long jobs at places for a long time, but more
Mhm.
shorter times, and many of them.
Mhm.
She was like, "Oh, makes sense," like attention span and getting bored. And we'd have conversations and stuff. And so we kind of did this mapping of what I liked, what was good at, what would I
Mm.
like to do. Like I like building things, I like startup type, I like community.
Mm.
And so we started kind of mapping those things out. And at some point, he's like, "Well, why don't you just do this for yourself?" You know?
Yeah.
And I think at first I was like, "Oh, but I can't." So it was like a moment.
Yeah.
it was like an interesting moment where I was just like, why can't I do it for myself?
Right.
You know, because I still had all those relationships that I had built over years, and I had my niche, if you will, my community that I
Yeah.
work with, and I was good at my job. You know, uh, it's just that environment, right? It's the environment
Yeah.
that was not the fit. Um, and so in that moment, I was still on leave, so I wasn't necessarily looking for a job at that point, but um, it just it just like flipped my world around a little bit, and it's
Mhm.
like, okay, what would it look like for me to work for myself?
Mhm.
And funny enough, one of my best friends, at some point, I would express like my frustrations at work, and she also was like, "Well, why don't you work for yourself? Sounds like you'd be good at that." And so it's just like, okay, now I got to do that, you know.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
what I tell people, that was the moment that instead of supporting all these missions and all these causes that I had been throughout the years, this is the time to support my own cause, my own mission.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I'm even getting like little goosebumps right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, so that was really helpful when, when an individual empowers you, right, to do what feels right, what's right for you, and also takes you away. I think it was helpful for him to take me away from you don't have to work at an office job, kind of big, or you don't have to work a
Yeah.
traditional job. That's
Yeah.
the only thing that I could picture. Being that
Right.
it's the other piece of it is, being a nonprofit, I thought that it would be all good and all good feelings and stuff. And that was clearly not what I experienced. Um, and yeah, it was time, it was time to do me.
Yeah. It is amazing when we're challenged to not even necessarily do something different, but just the act of slowing down and observing. Like you talked about the mapping of the things that you like to do. And I think um we might do that in passing with friends. We might or like, we might reflect on, "Oh, somebody complimented me on the job that I did at work today. I really like that thing. Okay, now I'm gonna keep it moving." I find it for me, there wasn't a lot of times where I could just or where I allowed myself to slow down enough to look at what is it that I like to do? Am I doing that here? And then asking the question to myself of, well, should I work for myself was just not even fathomable to me until other people started asking me that question. Like that was not being an entrepreneur was not a thing that I grew up with. And in fact was opposite. Like I'm I think that my, like, underlying mental model was that, like, entrepreneurship were for people that, like, failed at their jobs. Um, that, like, you have a job in this world, and when you suck at it, then you try and figure out how to make money other ways. Um, and that's, clearly not at all what this is about. And in fact, I work much harder now and for much longer hours. Um than when I was working for somebody, but it is, amazing when we're able to step back and have that realization of like, "Oh, well, I mean, I guess I could." So, awesome. I'm glad that that was a journey that you that you went through, and maybe that's like a bright side to all of this was just this realization that, like, you are the resource, um, and you can take you with you anywhere.
Yeah, to add to in that instance, I just felt like my blinders were off, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm doing and it's led me to the work that I do right now. I mostly work with individuals that work at nonprofits who are burnt out, who have been doing this for so long, that it's just become a thing that they do. And like myself, possibly lost their voice. They're like goals, just chasing the money and the hustle. Yeah. So the blessing being that I can do this, I can also have this impact on individuals, the same kind of impact that I had in nonprofits. I do it one on one with individuals and I help individuals
Mm-hmm.
get unstuck from this, whether it's a toxic work environment, work, toxic work relationship, right? That's something different too. And really kind of flip it and empower them to, is this what you want to do? What is it that you want to do? Really empower people to, just build them up to do whatever it is that they find more fulfilling in life. More joy, less of work frustrations, less dealing with people, obviously. But everyone's different, so
Yeah.
depends where they want to work. But it's really chasing whatever fulfills you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you had filed with the EEOC, a complaint with the EEOC, and then that you went back and filed with the comparable organization in California. Um, what was that process like?
Dealing with these agencies that are, whether or not they're state or federal, very frustrating. The first one, they just, I guess, made a note of it. Um, but when I filed it, there was a 3-month waiting period for the. So remember, this is
Mm.
like during COVID, so I'm sure
Oh, yeah,
all
yeah,
that
yeah,
all
yeah.
that stuff impacted their flow. Um, and I thought that federal, not knowing anything, right? I was like, oh, the federal one's going to be like the better one. So I did that one first. They were like, no. Then I had to file for the other one, and I think the waiting period for that was like 6 months or something to get an
Oh,
interview.
wow.
Yeah, and so I filed it, when it all happened because I was just like on the computer doing searches and stuff, and I had the interview in March. Uh,
Mm.
after all this thing, I had the interview. Then I got feedback. I guess they sent me like a report, and that's what it felt like.
Yeah,
And
taking notes and getting feedback.
they sent it to my former employer for, I guess, verification or investigation. The investigation did not go any further than them exchanging emails. Um, and that was like a very frustrating point because I know that in my in my emails I had emailed HR about this constantly, the bullying,
Right.
right, that was happening, and and also the ADA accommodation I had requested, but I didn't have access to the email. And silly me did
Mm.
not copy my personal email. These
Mm-hmm.
things. I didn't think it would obviously go this far, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But once I emailed all staff, then my email was cut off.
I don't
So,
blame him. I'm not gonna lie. I don't blame him.
so I didn't have time to recover those emails in that time. And so come in March, because that was in December, right? Come March, I was like, I know they're. I was like, what did you do to investigate? Like, can you, and her emails, kind of thing. Like, what did you go into the email? They're like, no, they just said that there weren't any in the inbox. That's just like, that was so disappointing to hear because I
Yeah,
thought it was going to go further than that.
yeah, yeah,
And like, she said, I said, kind of thing. I'm like, really? This sounds like
yeah,
you're like backing them up, you know?
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and then, so, of course, they denied all the things. And then they sent me the report, which, like I said, is like feedback. It's like they said that they didn't find anything. Very blah. I spoke to my case manager. I don't know what you call them, but the person that I was working with,
Within the state
agents,
agency?
with his the
Oh,
state agency, and they then explained that they could issue a letter to sue. I guess whatever the language is on that letter, I still it was still like new and still is new. And I was like, oh, so you're gonna give me this piece of paper says I can sue. What do you guys do?
And then what? Like, so are you suing? Like,
You know,
or this was just
and
some determination that, like, I can sue?
right. So it was a determination that I can sue, um, which thank you for letting me know, you know. But at that point, I have no resources to, they're like, well, you can hire an attorney, right? So go through the process of hiring an attorney. Now you have this letter, and then you can serve them, or whatever that process is. I didn't go through that process. I didn't go through the suing process. I didn't have resources at the time for that to go into it. Um, and yeah, I didn't have resources. My patience also at that point was just like, my mood, I was just like, wow, I just like, I don't know, it felt like time wasted, putting this, because now it lives in some chart, right?
Right.
No direction, like, so I didn't pursue what some people might have pursued in terms of like suing them and stuff.
Mhm.
In addition, too,
Mhm.
like I didn't want to go through the whole thing again. You know, I had also made the decision that I was going to leave San Francisco, and I was just like, I need all of it out. Thing. Because remember, I was living also around the organization and compounded with the
Yeah.
pandemic of people not going out. Like I was just like, oh, this is. I feel like I literally cannot go out.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you and I talked before about just when you experience trauma at work, and realizing how much that impacts so much, and even like the feeling that you have within like geographic proximity to that place. Just like other types of traumas, where like a survivor of physical violence or assault might, when they're driving by a place where it happened, they might get flashbacks or whatever. Like that has certainly been my experience of just kind of whenever I'm in the vicinity, it's just I feel it. I feel different and uncomfortable and heightened senses and yeah,
Yeah, I even had like a little
absolutely.
paranoia, like a paranoia thing where
Mhm.
I did have some colleagues that I was not friends, but we were, we could talk to each other kind of thing, even on social media. But I just felt that they were talking to me and then they would take it back to work. Like I just had this weird
Oh,
paranoia that everyone is against me. Like I don't belong there at all. Even though they didn't. I mean, they got the email, but they didn't know like the whole backstory, right?
yeah. Yeah. Um Okay, so after filing this or going through the state complaint process and getting this right to sue letter, um, it sounds like you ultimately needed to just kind of let that go because of the barriers that so many people experience when needing to seek legal assistance, which is like, oh, where the fuck do I go? And how do I pay for this? Um, is that I don't know, like, how does that sit with you even now, 3 years later, from, I guess, the point at which you left that that organization? Um, how does all of it make you feel now?
I learned a lot. I learned a lot. Having me on your podcast, for example, and sharing this with people. I do this for a reason because some people might not know. Not that I knew all the things to do, but even just thinking about like this is wrong. Just having like this seems wrong. So I
Mhm.
sit in my power and I do these podcasts and interviews with no problem because it's all truth, you know? It's all truth.
Mhm.
And now in my coaching, I think it's the other piece, right? Where I get to work with people who experience this themselves. And the reward of seeing people just like start their own business is so beautiful, it's so empowering that it just confirms that I'm doing the right thing. Um, and yeah, I just sit in my power now. Let's hear.
Uh, um, I during this series of the show, I'm talking to other folks who have gone through um harassment or discrimination in the workplace, and also people who are advocating on behalf of folks experiencing harassment in the workplace. And I like to give these perspectives because, as I started out by saying, it can be so easy for us to count ourselves out of this. We might explain away what we're experiencing, and it may not rise to the level of legal harassment. Uh, that's quite possible. And whether or not it does, there's so much, it still impacts us, and it still impacts our work performance. It still impacts our mental health and our physical health. And um, sometimes there's not going to be a remedy. Sometimes there's not going to be a nice, clean, easy way out. Um, I'm like glad for you that you're in California instead of Georgia, where, I
Mm.
mean, in Georgia, you're not getting paid for taking time, you know? Um, and so it's times like these where I'm like, this is why those employment or employee programs are needed, because we are humans. And sometimes we need breaks, sometimes we need support, sometimes we need to be able to do things to care for ourselves so that we can continue to be the employee that you need us to be. Um, but Georgia is definitely a at will state, which means you can get fired for any reason or no reason, which is not great. Um, so I want to ask you, as we wrap this up, what are you most proud of when thinking back on that situation and where you've come? What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of advocating for myself, being that hard-headed, stubborn, but in my ADHD words, focused, hyper-focused on this ain't right, and just doing my research and advocating where I can, where I could, starting from with my psychiatrist as a resource, and other friends who work in labor law and unions, all that stuff. Um, yeah, I think that's one of the proudest things that even though I've I would have liked to see something else out of it. Part of it is also letting go. So I'm also proud of letting go of it, and taking with me the piece, the good parts. The advocacy, starting my own business, feeling empowered. Uh, yeah, and I think that the last thing is just starting my own business, and starting with that same thought of empowering individuals to get out of these situations, or to feel empowered, to build people, because they don't build us up. They don't build us up anywhere. So I think that's one of my proudest adventures, journeys, things that I've done.
Yeah. And what is your hope for those listening today?
My hope is that if you're listening and something like this where it ain't right, you feel that you've been bullied, harassed, discriminated against. Um, I hear you. I see you. Um, if you feel that it's not right, then it's not right, and that even though I didn't take it all the way right, or the way that I would have liked this to go, it's empowering to go through the steps. Um, because at the end of the day, it's your future. Uh, would you rather do that for X amount of time, or feel empowered and find your joy, find something that's fulfilling, that fulfills you for like all the angles?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Hopefully it was helpful for folks to hear. It's certainly helpful for me. I have not been through any kind of formal discrimination process, and I even venture to say, while I've been in uncomfortable work environments, I would not say that I have been a subject to harassment. And so, learning about what that experience is like and how people find their way through it is really inspiring and really just informational too for me. So I really appreciate your time and coming to the show. Can you share with us where folks can find you if they want to reach out?
Yes. So you can go to my website, which is Noris Knows, as in know it all. So norisknows.com. And I'm on social media at Social Artivista. And also my work account is also Queer Compass Coach for my coaching and consulting on Instagram.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Okay, awesome. So after Norris and I stopped recording, we continued to talk just about how difficult it is to navigate the employment law landscape if you are someone who feels as though they are subject to harassment in the workplace. I was really interested in learning more about the right to sue letter in California, since that's something that is unique to the California Office of Civil Rights. And what I learned is that if you have a complaint against an employer in California, then you're filing your complaint with that body, with the California Civil Rights Department. Once you've filed the complaint, that department then has to issue what's called this right to sue letter, which then gives you the right to file a lawsuit on your own. Or you can also go through the California Civil Rights Department's own investigatory process to determine whether or not they are able to enforce the civil rights laws relating to your case. They're clear on their website, though, that not every civil rights law is one that they enforce within their office. So they appear to review the intake that you've done to determine whether or not your case falls under one of these enforceable laws. If it does not, then your case is closed and you have this right to sue notice, and you go and you find an attorney to sue. If the case does fall within their enforceability purview, then they'll start an actual investigation to determine whether or not there may have been discrimination. And if so, the parties have to go through a mediation process. And if mediation is unsuccessful, then the office will file a lawsuit on the employee's behalf. So it sounds like Norris may have been either in the first element of, okay, you have the right to sue notice. However, whatever law covers this type of discrimination is not a law that is enforceable by our office. Or they could have determined that this, in fact, was not discrimination. And so we, are not able to move this forward. Or maybe he even got through to this next level of, okay, now we've investigated and determined that this was not a violation of a law that we enforce. Either way, I do want to leave folks knowing that there is support out there. It's very likely that you don't get the outcome that you want if you're somebody that's experiencing this type of harassment or discrimination within your workplace. However, um, don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on your joy. Don't give up on your sense of pride. Don't give up on your own humanity. Take care of yourself. Of course, my consulting firm, W. Knox Lee Consulting and Mediation, provides mediation in employment law disputes. And I am happy to assist you where that's needed. Thank you for listening to this episode. I will talk to you next time. Until then, be validated. Thank you so much for listening to Impostrix Podcast. I appreciate your support and that you continue to listen week after week after week. I've got some exciting news, which is that you can now listen and support Impostrix Podcast on the Alive Podcast Network app. You will find ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts, in addition to Impostrix Podcast, and you'll be able to support those podcasts and really kind of get into your groove with that app. I hope that you will join me over there. I appreciate your support. To connect with me, feel free to join me on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast. You can also join me on Facebook in our validating space. Just search for Impostrix Podcast. All right, until next time, be validated.